once again. Thank you all for joining us. This is Nuance. I am Mike Scala, joined, of course, by Jay Carter, also known as Timid, the hip-hop artist in the chair of BLM Tokyo. What's going on, Jay?
Just normal Wednesday morning over here right now for me. So getting some things together. Actually, I've got a couple of events scheduled coming up, so been putting together some presentations. So
Okay.
yeah.
I actually feel like I'm coming down with the cold, although I gotta say, right now it's not terribly bad. This morning it was kind of rough, so I'm hoping I don't actually get sick, because I've been in that space where you feel like you're on the verge of getting sick and you hope you don't actually get there. So let's hope it doesn't go any further than that.
No, you know what? I had that same feeling a couple of days ago. It was just briefly, just the feeling you're talking about, where like you feel like something's coming on, something is off, you feel it. And I immediately went and popped like a couple 100 milligrams or 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C, and then some zinc.
Okay.
And some water with some lemon. And I was good the next day.
That sentence was an adventure. I didn't know where that was going.
Would you think I was gonna pop?
Yeah, I popped a couple hundred. I'm like, where is this going? You popped a couple hundred. What?
Yeah, I think it was more. I think it was probably 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C, and then like
is 1 gram. That doesn't sound as good, right? Isn't 1,000 milligrams 1 gram? I don't think that sounds as good to say, though. I popped a gram of vitamin C.
Yeah, I don't think it. Yeah, I wonder why people don't say that. That's funny.
Because of the way it sounds. It sounds like you're a drug addict, even though it's just vitamins.
Yeah, I guess so, right? And then, and I was good the next day, which I was kind of nervous about coming down with a cold, because I haven't been sick since before COVID. Not a cold at all since before COVID.
You get COVID?
No, I haven't gotten COVID.
Okay.
Before the COVID era started. So
right.
Actually, I can remember the last time I was sick was like that December 2019. So
I was actually really sick at that time as well. The end of 2019 going into the beginning of 2020. And it was kind of odd. To this day, maybe that was COVID, even though that was before the pandemic, right before we got COVID. A lot of people, I wasn't the only one. I know a lot of people who got this very weird sickness right around that time. And at the time, we didn't know what COVID was. We said, oh, it's this crazy flu or crazy virus, a crazy cold, whatever. But it was different. The symptoms were different. We weren't used to those types of symptoms. And then the pandemic hit. And in retrospect, it was like, wow, was that a really early case of COVID? Maybe.
End of November, the beginning of December, I was sick for like 3 weeks. I had something, and I don't know what it was. It was like 3 weeks worth of, I don't think it was COVID, but it was just, there's a lot of mucus and all this and that. And it's just, so it's kind of crazy. So like you said, a lot of people did come down with something around that time.
Right. Well, speaking of crazy, I did want to mention this show, Generation Gap. I think I was telling you about it offline a bit, because it's interesting as a psychological or maybe a sociological experiment. I'm not sure, but you get to the end of the show, and the show itself, it's cool. It's a game show. You see, usually it's a grandparent playing with a child, right? And they'll ask the grandparents questions about the kids' generation. They ask the kids questions about the grandparents' generation. And that's kind of interesting to see. Oh, how many grandparents know Drake and Bad Bunny? How many kids know, I don't know, the Wonder Years or Happy Days or older stuff like that. So that's kind of cool, right? But the real interesting part to me is at the end, right? So they've got a team that wins the game. At the end, there's a bonus round where they bring a toddler from the family. And it's always, as far as I'm seeing, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, or a 5-year-old, right? And they've got the toddler choosing between 2 prizes. One of them is always a great prize for adults, for the whole family, right? Very valuable prize. And then one of them is something that the toddler would probably like, but really isn't worth any money. And to me, it's always fun to see, is the toddler aware enough or mature enough to figure out that one of the prizes actually is worth a lot more, and they would even benefit from it more, right? Because one of the classic ones I saw was, I think it was $30,000 cash or a teddy bear, right? The kid picked the teddy bear, not knowing that with $30,000 they can buy a lot of teddy bears, right? But they just picked the teddy bear. So I like seeing that. It's interesting to me, and sometimes I wonder if it's borderline abusive, to be honest with you, because I don't know, you're asking these kids to make choices that they're not old enough to make, and is that going to damage them in the future? Are they going to kick themselves for the rest of their lives over this? Who knows?
Nah, they'll be fine, especially if they got the teddy bear. They're going to forget all about it.
Well, now they will, but what about when they get older? Are they going to be like, man, I blew a chance my whole family to get $30,000 and lost other cool stuff,
Yeah, I think it'll be fine. It'll be all right.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly interesting to see. The one thing that I caught on to was it seemed like the 3-year-olds, and this should be no surprise, right? 3-year-olds were more prone to picking the kitty prize. The 4-year-olds were more mixed, and the 5-year-olds, for the most part, seemed to understand that you should pick the more adult-oriented prize because it has more value.
Right. I think that's interesting. That kind of indicates that there's something that happens between 3 and 5 where there's a learning that takes place where kids start to understand different types of value in that regard.
Right. It seems to be, right, when you're around 4 years old, according to this show at least,
right.
That's when they start to get that cognitive ability.
Yeah.
So
I'd like $30,000.
You like $30,000?
I'd like $30,000, sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like funny. One of them was like, I think between a jet ski and like a little rocking chair or something like that. It's like, even if you don't like the prize, you could sell it for a whole lot more money and then buy a ton of rocking chair.
Right. But I think that the kid is probably looking at like like one, they probably don't know what a jet ski is or what they do with it. 2, they see a rocking chair and it's not only they can sit in it, they can sit in it with grandma. They can, they're looking at it with different values,
Yeah. And it's cool because obviously these kids are so innocent, they don't even understand what value is. They don't understand what money is or what things are worth or selling things, right? That's not even in their head. It's just what appeals to me more as a child. And that's cool. That's wholesome.
Yeah. Maybe we've got our ideals messed up. Maybe they have the right values in place,
I mean, maybe, but it's certainly not financially sound, right?
Because of the world we've set up, but maybe that's not the way adults should be. Maybe the kids got it right. What is it? Isn't it in the Bible, it says something about from the mouths of babes or something like that. So maybe that's the lesson we should be learning. Yeah.
But then what happens when someone tries to sell their expensive prize and buy a whole bunch of the kiddie prizes? They can't do that because.
Yeah, sure, they could.
Guess the lesson.
No, they can do that. Sure, why not?
Oh, well, then that would suggest to me that they don't have it right.
Or maybe they could sell the teddy bear for like $30,000.
Oh, and you're setting up. That's a good point, right? Maybe we're putting the wrong value on things in the first place.
Yeah. So, what's up, James? James in the chat, first one to pop in that I see. You see more than
to pick.
Yeah, James, would you
have a version of this on Nuance? We can pick our own prizes, though. I sometimes do this with my dog, believe it or not, where I'll put 2 different toys out, or like a treat and a toy. I'll see what does he value more, right? You put him in the middle of the room and let him run towards it. He always picks one over the other. That's cool. Right. I don't know. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people do experiments where they have like the the partners, either husband and wife or whoever it is, and so they stand next to each other and they have the dog in the middle, and then they each run in opposite directions to see which one the dog is going to follow. And then sometimes the dog just gets confused and starts like spinning around in a circle. Sometimes it goes one way or the other, but it's that similar kind of choice there.
I saw Judge Judy do that once to decide a case. There were 2 people fighting over a dog, who should get the dog. And she was like, basically, let's let the dog decide. And they brought the dog into the courtroom and put it down, and they saw which people, which person it ran to.
Right. Makes it easy.
All justice.
Yeah. James said he'd pick the money. Yeah, I'd pick the money too.
Yeah. And sometimes there's trips. That's also like, a trip to Australia for 6 or a trip to Hawaii for 6. Your whole family goes to Hawaii, or you get a tricycle, little things like that.
Right. Speaking of,
the thing too is it seems manipulative because they're telling the kids to pick the prize that they like. They don't say pick a prize that your whole family could enjoy or that has the most value. They just basically say pick which prize you like the best. And so they're just doing what they're told, basically. That's the other thing about it, right? And one of the kids even asked the host, am I supposed to pick for me? And she's like, yeah, for you. But then the whole family is standing behind them cringing, like, oh, we could have made much, we could have made off like bandits. We picked the other one. But
Right.
doing what the kid is told. Pick the prize you like.
Absolutely. I just wanted to mention, speaking of Hawaii, just give prayers and everything out to Hawaii for what they're going through with Lahaina and the fires that took place in Maui. That's really devastating. Hopefully they can bounce back quite quickly from this.
Yes. So we've got a few topics we wanted to get into. We also had a poll from last week. You want to start off with the poll?
Yeah, we can start off with the poll, sure. So our poll from last week was, should police misconduct and use of force data be publicly available? I think it was worded a little bit different than that, but that was what the gist was. And what happened was NYCLU had released 20 years of New York State police misconduct and use of force records and made it publicly available on their website. And we went through and looked at it. On the site, there was a searchable format. They even had types of incidences, when they occurred. They've had the police officers' first and last names on there. And these were New York, part of their New York Police Transparency database that they've compiled and they've got available. So we put the poll out there, and it was kind of definitive in the responses. So 93% said yes, that they believe that it's important for this data to be publicly available. 5% said yes, but. So we're looking at 98% saying yes, and then we've got 2% said no. So it's pretty definitive. People feel like that data should be available.
Okay, and were there any interesting comments on that?
Well, people brought up, they're saying, they don't work for private firms. They work for the U.S. government, paid by taxpayer dollars. They should not be hiding this information. No one is above the law. Some people pointed out that this is a dirty cop's worst nightmare. Some people said, a person said that repeat offenders should be identified and given jobs that don't involve guns. And then brought up how much New York has to pay for these lawsuits for these police officers who.
That's a good point.
Come up in the misconduct, and they said that, and I think it's been brought up before, they said that they should make police use their own pension fund to insure themselves from lawsuits, which I don't know about that.
Well, the idea of insurance has been brought up a lot lately.
Yeah, I get it. Also, they're saying that from that point of view, they're saying at that point, they would see police would be, turn in the worst offenders rather than risk their pension.
Mm-hmm. But then you have the issue of liability, right? And immunity.
Right.
That we talked about on this show.
Right. So there's a couple of, interesting things. Someone said that jurors in Georgia have to be made public. So why not this? It's the same thing.
Jurors?
Yeah. So, I think they're just talking about transparency in general.
Right. They're not talking about misconduct, though, or use of force.
Right.
That juror had to use some force in that case.
Right. But I think it's just that their names attached to the trial is made public. So I guess that's just a transparency thing. And
more transparency, more accountability in general.
Right. Had another one saying that if you believe the government exists to serve the people, there's no question that the police and their data should be public. So I didn't see anybody make negative comments or support the no answer. So I don't know. But I think it was some good things brought up. There was one here, a person mentioned that in Massachusetts, there was instituted some police accountability reform in the last few years, but it hasn't been effective so far. They're still seeing officers not being held accountable for egregious behavior. And they said the very worst cases have resulted in lifetime bans from being hired for law enforcement in other communities, but they're outliers at this point. And I think that is a big issue with police officers who do get removed from the jobs. As we did see in some of the data, some did, a small portion got removed from their jobs, but we're seeing that there's this level of, there's a certain level where people are getting hired in other communities or other states on other police forces, even though you just got fired from law enforcement. And I think if you get fired from law enforcement for misconduct and use of force, you shouldn't be allowed to serve on law enforcement anywhere.
Right. Especially when you look at the numbers, we saw that, sure, people were getting fired, but it wasn't in the thousands. It was like 150 over the past 20 years.
It was very low, very, very low. Yeah. So.
And that's for these particular, right, for misconduct accusations. People might have been, I don't know, maybe they were laid off, fired for other reasons, but with these
right.
reports at least.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, so it's, it seems, as far as the numbers go, yeah, it seemed pretty definitive. People are in favor of this data being out there. So.
Right. And I'm just thinking back to when there was this controversy over repealing 50A, they called it, right? Which was a section of the rights law in New York that kept it private. There was pushback at the time. It seems like now that it's public, unless it's just the people who are answering the poll. But if you go by this, at least, it seems like now that it is public, people are satisfied with that being the result. But when it was up for debate, when it was an issue, when it was being voted on, it didn't seem so definitive, or at least not so unanimous at the time.
Right. And, I can see, I don't know, was that the public pushing back, or was that largely the police union and their affiliates?
I think that's where it largely stemmed from, but I think there were people who were certainly influenced by what they were saying, because you did have people, even on social media, saying this would not be a good idea. We have to protect the identities of the police officers.
Right. And we did bring that up. To be fair, we have to be fair on that point that, putting their identities out there like there is something that you have to consider in that regard.
Yeah, definitely.
Kevin says, stop letting them in. Stop letting who in?
I think he's talking about the migrant issue.
Oh, is that what he's talking about?
Because that's the headline.
We are going to get to that discussion, Kevin. We would definitely get there. But yeah, that's a serious topic that we got to figure out how to work with.
Right. So all right. I mean, do you want to?
Let's jump into it.
Might as well. Right? Thanks to Kevin segue here.
Yeah.
So we saw Creedmoor, right, being used the past week as a migrant shelter. They said 800 single men have actually moved into city-run tents outside the Creedmoor Psychiatric Center. You saw a lot of people protesting that. There was some civil disobedience around that. Funny that this is in George Santos's district, so that became an issue. But it didn't stop at Creedmoor, of course. Now they're talking about Floyd Bennett Field in Brooklyn, which of course is very close to the Rockaways. The federal government just approved that as a site, and so it looks like that's the next one. And we know that the mayor is saying repeatedly that there are too many migrants in the city for the city to handle. He's saying the city can go bankrupt at this rate, and he's not wrong, I don't think. So what is to be done? Kevin, I guess, gave us the opening salvo. He says, stop letting them in. The question is, where, right? Are you talking about the federal government? Are you talking about at the border? I'm going to guess he means at the border, or does he mean into New York?
Right. And that was, we talked about that before, like at some point, Newark was going to be over the capacity to handle the situation. I saw from an article that since 2022, nearly 100,000 migrants have arrived in New York City alone. And so, it's not an insignificant amount. And at some point, it's just either not going to be space, there's not going to be budget, there's just not going to be a lot. So I think Mayor Adams was basically saying that other places are going to have to start stepping up. New York can't shoulder the whole burden of this crisis.
Right. And people will point to a few things, right? They'll point to New York City being what's called a sanctuary city. But when that came up, That was very controversial going back a few years. And really, the point of it at that time was to stop the federal government, in particular ICE, right, from going
Right.
into school and in certain places and harassing children. We said that this is not what we believe in New York City. I think that was a different conversation. That was a different context slightly than this one, right? This whole sanctuary city thing got brought up again in this context, but that wasn't really what we were talking about then. I think we were talking about not having people come in and forcibly remove people from their families, children from their families, separating families
Right.
during the Trump administration when we saw what was going on at the border, especially. So a little bit of a different context here, but still certainly a concern. The other thing that people will bring up is the consent decree, they call it, from a lawsuit that happened many years ago, where it was decided that anyone homeless in New York had to receive care, right? We couldn't turn them away. And so it seems like people, officials, namely governors in certain Republican states, are taking advantage of this by sending people here or directing people to New York, knowing that by law now we can't send them away.
Right. And, and listen, humanitarian wise, it's an idea full of compassion, and it can be a good thing, but resources aren't unlimited. Space isn't unlimited. And so at some point, even being a sanctuary state, even having that law, there's going to be a point where they just can't anymore. It's going to be, not only will it be more difficult budget wise, but it's going to be kind of diminishing returns. The level of care or services offered is going to start diminishing because they've got so many people that they've got, running over whatever the budget is.
That's a fantastic point, because if the law is you have to give them care, they deserve care. Well, if the resources can't support adequate care and what you're giving them isn't really care anymore, are you complying with the mandate at that point? If you physically can't provide the services and you can't provide them any kind of treatment or care or help, then where are we? Then you're not complying with the law. And so you need to look to do something else, right?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I think, some places, other places are going to have to step up. I mean, there's just, it can't be unlimited. It's just not budgetary, physically, it's just not possible. New York is already limited in space as it is. There's a suggestion in the chat. James is saying, can't they just let them stay in empty apartments? Now, that's something that a lot of people have brought up. Like, there's a lot of empty apartments. There's a lot of office buildings. There's a lot of empty places. But then what do you do? This still has to be paid for. The owners of those places still have to be compensated. Or, are we asking them to give up their space and receive nothing? A lot of times they're still paying mortgages on them. So it means they're coming out of pocket. So,
right. And it isn't only a matter of where people are living. It's a matter of what are they doing? How are they living? Right.
Right.
So it's one thing to find a space for them to sleep, right? Which is what it seems like they're doing now on an emergency basis. But what do you do beyond that? I mean, if they can't work, then how are they supposed to contribute to society and survive themselves?
Right. And in food, I mean, they've got to eat. Yeah. So there's all takes money.
So for those curious, the case that I mentioned is called Callahan v. Carey. It was 1981, and it decided that the state had an obligation to provide food, shelter, supervision, and security to all homeless people applying for it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's an obligation for that, and I agree with that. I think this is a little bit different, in that they're bringing in people from outside of the city, outside of the country, and providing for, which I think, like I said, humanitarianly, compassion wise, it's definitely a positive step. But we have to recognize there are limits.
So based on what you just said, would you support, in theory, modifying that? Let's say it could be modified. Would you support modifying that to limit it to people who are already in New York as opposed to bringing people from the outside?
I would have to look at that and see more of the data on that, because we also just looked at what was the poll that took place in April that showed that 50% of New Yorkers aren't able to meet basic needs. And so if you're bringing in people from other states, not just necessarily migrants or refugees from other countries, but even just people from other states, and 50% of the people that already live there can't afford to live there. And so those services and that budget and that space and everything is going to people from outside, then I think that's a bit of a problem.
Really a problem. And polling shows, by the way, that an overwhelming majority of New Yorkers now say that this is a serious problem.
Yeah. I think that's what they should be looking at first is, look, 50% people living here can't afford to live here. We have to make some adjustments for that, at least for these people that are living here already. It's great to be compassionate for others, and we should be. But if there's 50%, then you've got a bigger priority, I think, in some regards, to the people that live in the city.
So this was a statement that the mayor made on that consent decree that I mentioned. He said, when the original Callahan consent decree came down almost 40 years ago, no one could have contemplated, foresaw, or even remotely imagined the mass influx of individuals entering our system, more than doubling our census count slightly over a year. Our city has more to support asylum seekers than any other city in the nation, but the unfortunate reality is the city has extended itself further than its resources will allow.
Right. And that's just reality, and it's unfortunate reality, but it just is. And again, other places are going to have to step up. If other people are, there are other sanctuary cities, and I'm right, but
you're okay. So you mean within New York City? Because you're saying other places, but if New York has this consent decree, basically New York is obligated by law not to turn people away, right? So what does New York do in that case? If New York is receiving these people,
right? Yeah. In that case, New York is definitely in a bind. But I think it would have to be challenged because, you can't, it's just if there's no money, right? If there's no places to house people, there's just no places to do it. It's unrealistic.
Do you agree with the mayor's suggestion that these migrants who are in the city should be given the opportunity to work, get jobs?
I'd have to look at more data on that. I don't know if I can agree or disagree with that, because that does pose a very interesting or difficult issue for people that are already there in the city trying to get jobs. If all of a sudden, like what was the numbers, 100,000 people in the last year, all of a sudden flood the job pool with temporary, working status. I can see that causing some kind of a controversy.
Right. But I guess you have to weigh that against what it does to the system to have all these people here who are not able to work.
Right. Absolutely.
That's costing us more resources to continue to take care of these folks, right? And they become a big burden on everything and everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the bonus is if they can work, then they can pay their way or pay partially their way. Maybe there's a happy middle ground. I know I believe it was before Clinton made the law that he did, international students were able to work in the United States while they were going to school, but they were limited. I think they could only do like 20 hours a week or something like that, a part-time basis. And then if I remember correctly, there was sometime in the 90s that Clinton made a law and then they weren't allowed to work anymore. I remember that because a lot of friends around me were international students at the time. And so maybe there's a happy middle ground in that they can work in a limited capacity. 20 hours a week, part-time jobs or whatever.
Yeah,
But
I mean, we see that again, going back to the poll that you cited, right? 50% of
right,
users can't meet their basic needs. I mean, even working a full-time job now is
that's
difficult
true.
to make ends meet in New York.
That's true. That's true. But if they're already being, I would imagine even if they're able to work, a large portion of them, there's going to be language barriers. There's going to be, different sorts of obstacles in the way that the jobs that they're going to be able to get might be lower level jobs, lower paying jobs. And so they're still going to require assistance from the city and the budget. So at 20 hours a week can pad a little bit of that to extend the budget a little bit further. Maybe not a lot, but it's some kind of relief on the system, perhaps.
Could be, right? But then you're looking at maybe more of a Band-Aid solution, not anything.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I don't think any of it is a permanent solution.
Right. So here's something I wanted to ask about. A lot of people obviously are complaining about these proposals, and sometimes they become more than proposals, to build these tent cities, they call them, or shelters for migrants at various locations, right? We saw Creedmoor being the big controversial one over the past week. Now we're looking at Floyd Bennett Field and other places. A couple of weeks ago, it was Resorts World, right? They talked about that parking lot around here, big uproar. And I understand the community's concern. I understand everyone's concerned about this. But my question is, where? I mean, I think there are genuine fears about bringing in, hundreds and thousands of migrants into residential neighborhoods, especially where the infrastructure locally cannot support it. Absolutely. But if you're talking about an area that's a little bit outside, right? Like, for example, Floyd Bennett Field or Resorts World, these are not smack dab in the middle of residential areas. People are still up in arms about it. So, again, my question is not that I agree with what's happening here, but I'm just curious as to what people think about this. Where would be a suitable location? Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes in that situation where what's NIMBY, right? Not in my backyard. And again,
but how far does that extend? Though, right? I understand. If there are legitimate, and listen, and then there are also legal protections in place when it comes to overburdening the infrastructure in an area. You're talking about what it does to sewage systems, what it does to, electric grids, what it does to even things like parking or mass transit or pollution. All these things play a role. If you're talking about bringing in people now to schools, classroom, what do you call that? Classrooms being overcrowded, right?
Right.
So all these issues are valid to take into account. But when you're talking about now not being in a direct neighborhood, being even outside of a neighborhood, people are concerned that, well, it's too close to where I live, which I get. But is there an answer then? I mean, because it seems like anywhere you propose to temporarily house people is going to cause concerns and problems to people.
Right. And that's, I think, is the root of the problem. It's just like, if it's moved outside of your neighborhood and you still have an objection, the objection is really that you just don't want them coming in, period. Because, if they've already removed the first obstacle that you're complaining about, which, again, to be fair, is understandable, then that's the root of the problem is something else. It's not an easy solution. There are a lot of people working on it. I think, where is the best place is always going to be a difficult thing to think about. We do have
a matter of who's the most politically organized. Because if everyone is going to say no, not here, then it's just a matter of who screams, who's the loudest, who puts the most political pressure on to get their way, right? Because you're just going to be basically kicking the ball around to everyone else until someone else can't kick it back.
Right. Absolutely. So, maybe you got to be in a place where there's some sort of infrastructure. We have in the country, we have vast swaths of unoccupied lands that could be tent cities, so to speak, but you still need infrastructure, right? People still need sewage. They still need ways to get food. They still need, So it's got to be connected to some sort of city or some sort of civilization.
Right,
So to
right.
difficult to
That's right, and that always becomes the song and dance, I think, with this, not just with this issue, but even with homeless shelters in general, or anything like that. Even even you start talking about, well, I guess jails is a little bit of a different story, but you do see that type of discussion there also, where it's like, all right, you want to have these facilities in a place where the people in them can become a part of society. So you're putting them on a deserted island somewhere isn't helping anyone. But when they're too close to a neighborhood, people freak out, right? And they say, well, we don't want that here.
Right. Yeah, it's a difficult decision. In the chat, we've got question also, what kind of background checks do these people have? It's scary. And I think if we're being fair and honest, from my understanding, there's been no extensive issues with any of the migrants causing crime or any sort of issues. So, I mean, it's something, of course, I understand people are worried about, but I don't think we've seen any evidence that, these people that are coming in, by and large, are someone that needs to be worried about in that regard. There's people.
Right. But I think there's a concern, though, that the system is so backlogged that you're seeing things like with stories, at least, right? That, they get processed and they're told they've got to come in for an interview in the year 2032 or something like that, because they're just so far behind. And so when would we ever have a chance to even sit down and figure out who anyone is?
Right. No, absolutely. No, it's absolutely, it's a concern that should be on the table. It's a valid concern. Because some people, no doubt, are going to try to use this as an advantage to slip into the country that normally would have been caught other ways or kept out or whatever the case may be. But I don't think they're the bulk of the people.
Right.
I think by and large, it's people that are trying to escape a difficult situation, looking for a better situation, better life for themselves and their family.
Right. But here's the thing, though. If those opportunities are not here, then you have a concern, because we see crime does go up when the economic opportunities are not present. And so I think you do have to worry about that when you're bringing in hundreds of thousands of people who aren't able to access our economy. A lot of them are going to turn to crime inevitably. It doesn't mean that they would have if they wanted to, but that's the situation that they now find themselves.
And a lot of people would in that same position.
Sure.
When you've got to feed your family, when you've got to provide, people are going to do things they might not normally do. I don't think we've seen, and I could be wrong, I don't think we've seen this evidence that this is what's happening right now.
In large numbers, but it's also a very new thing.
Sure.
Level, right?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, it's, it's difficult. And I like I said, I get it. If someone said, okay, we're going to put 10,000 migrants in your neighborhood. Yeah, I can understand people feeling uncomfortable. Because you've also got to look out for your neighborhood, your children, your family. And, these are 10,000 people you don't know. And even let's say it was people from like Montana coming in and being put in there. I think it would be a similar concern.
Maybe. Well, similar, yes, but not quite the same.
Not the same.
Right. And I do think that needs to be part of the discussion as well. We need to be careful, right? Because these are all valid concerns, but we don't want to give credibility to arguments that are just rooted in plain old racism or xenophobia.
Absolutely. So, and I think that's what's important is to be able to weigh all of these different points, which is hence nuance. Like you have to be able to look at all that and not take that absolute type of view of something. Like some people have valid concerns. We may not be comfortable hearing it, but some people do have valid reasons for not wanting or being uncomfortable about certain situations, and then some have unreasonable concerns.
Right. And then there's a whole spectrum, right? Where, and some are valid concerns, but for unreasonable reasons and so forth. So.
Absolutely. So, yeah, it's very difficult. I've said, largely, like as far as people coming in from Mexico, my solution would be complete. I don't know what they're doing at the federal level, but I think one of the, our economy relies on a lot of migrants from Mexico. I mean, it just does. Migrants from, not just migrants from Mexico, but even immigrants from other countries that come here other ways. It just relies on that. It's part of who we are, that melting pot. I would try to do, if I were in that position, I would try to do things to help bolster Mexico, if possible, help them, see if there was anything that we could do to help them. Because some of the problems are caused by us, some of those conditions are caused. We talk about crime, we talk about drug trade. Well, we're the big, the United States is the biggest buyers of the drug cartels, drugs coming out of Mexico. So we're basically sponsoring that situation that's causing some of the people to flee. So we've got to look at all of these different types of things. I would think a lot of these people don't want to leave their homes. They would prefer to live in the land they're born, just like a lot of people would. But if this opportunity is not there, if it's violent, if it's this and that, maybe Mexico could use help with that if they're so inclined to take that type of help. So,
yeah, it's also, I think, worth mentioning that up until recently, the net immigration from Mexico to the U.S. was negative. Right?
Yeah.
People were going to Mexico than to the U.S. But
yeah.
Recently.
Yeah. Has that reversed?
Yeah, for the past few years.
Okay, because it was for a long time, like I said, it was a net negative. And even while people are saying, oh, well, there's so many people overrunning the borders, like, no, that's not really true. But yeah, now if it's reversed. And I think one thing that's not talked about enough that should be recognized, and it doesn't help the migrants, but it's more, in my opinion, Mexico's position on what America should be doing in this regard, is this idea of bolstering of the border and dealing with the migrants coming in. Mexico takes a very hard line on their southern border with the migrants that are trying to come through, at the same time criticizing the U.S. for trying to raise this issue with our southern border. So I think there's a bit of hypocrisy there
Right.
with the governments.
Well, certainly a lot to this discussion. We didn't have a poll question picked out, but we can ask on this, maybe even about the jobs in New York City. Could be a good one. Now, do we want to make it more universal than just New York so that people can weigh in from other places too?
Sure.
About the U.S., getting jobs in America?
Sure. Yeah, should migrants, I guess.
Okay, so let's try it. The poll question of the week is, do you believe that migrants who arrive in the U.S. should be eligible to work here?
Yeah. So, yeah, I wonder, and anyone in the chat, I wonder what you might think about, what your opinion might be on that.
And I know a lot of people are going to say, close the border, don't let them in, send them out. But if that's not practical now, right, because we're in a situation that we're in, we have these laws in place. Now, sure, there could be work to change policies and change laws and file lawsuits and all these different things. I get it. But I also want to know what you would do now, given the situation that we're in and the laws and policies that are in place. What is the solution now, given that New York is not authorized to send people away? New York has to give people care. But as we mentioned, the resources at a certain point are not going to support that anymore. And then even if we tried, we wouldn't be able to meet that consent decree. And then what do we do, right? What should we do now in the short term? And we can talk long-term solutions too. Right.
And then we've already got two yeses. We got one yes in the chat and one that says, I think they should definitely help people. And I think, it is that kind of gray area, right? Where we want to be compassionate. We want to be humanitarian. But like I said, there can be a limit. There are other circumstances that also have to be considered, and it can be difficult all the way around. But I think, continuing, to keep a dialogue open, one that takes in the different issues and acknowledges all of these different things is one step forward to keeping things moving.
Right, right. And the fact now that, as I mentioned, a majority of New Yorkers are saying this is a serious problem, I think that allows us to have more of a nuanced conversation, because we're at least agreeing for the most part that there is a problem and something has to be done, and that we can have a divergence of opinion on the solutions, but at least we're kind of starting at a similar point here, right? Where we can have a conversation about an issue that we agree is serious.
Right. Absolutely. And, at the same time, reaching that hand out to help people, but also acknowledging that there are people in New York already that are having issues and are struggling and need help as well.
Yeah. I mean, New York is the greatest city, but we have our share of problems, and people who live here, many of them are suffering and struggling, as we've seen. So that perspective, I think, needs to be kept. And we're seeing that play out in other issues as well. One of them is the Medicare Advantage controversy, which we have not spoken about on here, but I think we should, because I do hear from city workers, many of whom are retired or retiring, and they're concerned about this proposal, right? Now,
look at that segue. That was smooth.
That's what comes from a year plus of doing this every week. No Tuesdays off.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So many people are aware, but for those who don't know, right, there was a proposal that the Adams administration put forth in New York to require retired public sector workers, and there's 250,000 of them roughly in the city, to switch over to a Medicare Advantage plan, which is a privately run Medicare plan, will be managed by Aetna, as opposed to the public Medicare that they were able to get, or get their own private health insurance, right? There was a lawsuit on this. Many of the retirees pushed back against it. And just recently, a judge ordered, this came down on Friday, a judge ordered a permanent ban on the plan, essentially stopped the plan in its tracks, saying that the city promised these workers access to Medicare, traditional Medicare, and could not force them to switch over to privatized Medicare.
I agree. I don't think they should be forced to switch over. I understand there's some budget concerns or whatever it is, but if these people worked their careers and their lives, and this was what was promised to them, you can't switch it up, especially in a position where they're not able to be as nimble career wise or financial wise to some sort of different financial situation. Like, you can't do that. It's just,
well, yeah, certainly a complicated issue here. I think we could start with the fact that the mayor is saying that this would have saved the city $600 million a year. And so we do see that we're in the budget crunch that we're in. We just talked about the overburdening of our resources with the migrants. And so $600 million a year would go a long way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But again, I agree. If there was a promise made, basically, even if it wasn't like explicitly said, if this was what people were told was going to happen, then I don't think it's fair to do that. That should be off the table.
I think there is a concern about privatizing Medicare or any of these government programs that we've come to rely upon. I remember President Bush wanted to privatize Social Security, right? Wasn't that one of his proposals? And
yeah.
Received a lot of pushback with good cause over that.
Yeah.
I think it is something that we need to be very mindful of. You always hear about these efforts to privatize these resources. I mean, even NYCHA, they were talking about that, privatizing the housing authority. I mean, there are certain things I think that the government does that obviously they're not perfect, but instead of trying to take it off the government and make it completely private, run by a private company, I think our focus should be on strengthening the programs.
I agree. And there's been a lot of effort to privatize certain things, generally coming from the GOP, where, like I said, Bush tried to do Social Security. GOP has tried constantly to try to privatize the U.S. Postal Service, which it's just, these things should not be put into private hands, because then it's going to turn into a for-profit endeavor. People are going to eventually lose out on it. And we've seen this issue with prisons being privatized, which I totally disagree with. And we're seeing the situations there. First of all, conditions aren't as great as they could be, but also you've got things that are encouraging 100% occupancy, which is ridiculously unethical in my opinion. These things shouldn't be put into privatized hands.
So in the judge's July 6th ruling, which was when a preliminary injunction was issued prior to the permanent one that we just saw, the judge stated that the retirees have shown that numerous promises were made by the city to then New York City employees and future retirees that they would receive a Medicare supplemental plan when they retired, and that their first level of coverage once they retired would be Medicare. It's always interesting, right, when they say, well, this is Medicare, it's Medicare Advantage. But as we know, that's private Medicare. That's not the same thing.
Right. Absolutely.
And then there are debates about the level of care that you receive and whether your healthcare costs would increase, right? And retirees in this lawsuit were raising concerns that, in fact, their cost of healthcare would go up under this plan.
Right. And it's a concern of everybody, but it would be even more of a concern for someone on a fixed income and that doesn't have, one, fixed income, and two, doesn't have the ability to re-enter the workforce at a capacity that might bring them the extra income that they might need. Right? It's not a good thing to do. Someone in chat said, was that only affecting DC 37?
DC 37 is now pushing to have all of their members call the council members to support a bill for this plan. So DC 37 is in favor of the plan, but this would affect, what would have affected every retired public sector worker in the city. So you have teachers under this, you have all kinds of people.
Right. It looked like it said there was 250,000 retired employees, and their elderly or disabled dependents.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just I don't think it's a good plan. I understand the need to shore up the budget, or I mean, that's a huge amount of money to free up. Mm-hmm. But I would think that they should look elsewhere. There's got to be tons of places where they can streamline processes that's going to save money and whatnot.
Well, here's a quote from the mayor's spokesperson, Jonah Allen. This Medicare Advantage plan, which was negotiated closely with and supported by the Municipal Labor Committee, would improve upon retirees' current plans, including offering a lower deductible, a cap on out-of-pocket expenses, and new benefits like transportation, fitness programs, and wellness incentives. This decision only creates confusion and uncertainty among our retirees, he said. So, of course, to see the debate here is centered around, is it a better plan or is it not? And that might also depend on who you are, right? It might be a person-to-person thing.
But is that a better plan? Is that a better plan for everyone? Or is that a better?
That's what I'm saying. That is the question, right? Is it
for some people?
For certain people.
Is it a better plan in the introductory phase? And then next year, since it's a private company, they decide they're going to change it? Like, there's a lot of things I think to consider there.
Right. And I think you are right to be suspicious anytime you're dealing with privatizing something like this. Privatizing Medicare, I think, should raise eyebrows.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Janet's asking, does this even include MTA employees?
MTA employees are not considered municipal workers, are they?
That I don't know. I do not know there. These are 250,000 retired public sector workers. Would they be considered public sector workers?
Well, public sector, but are they municipal workers?
Right.
Are they directly working for the city? If they're MTA employee, they wouldn't be, right?
I wouldn't think so. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to answer that specifically. That would require more looking into, but yeah, I wouldn't know. I think the judge did good in this case. If going forward, Adams wants to try to push this going forward on a different generation or a different group, then I think that may be something to be discussed. But for people who are retired, who have worked for a certain outcome, I don't think it's good to switch this up in in their retired life.
Well, did we want to talk about Rikers while we were on this roll? Or do we want to hold that for next week? I've got an interesting story about my time on Rikers as a guest.
Sure.
Sometimes I wonder if it's borderline abusive, to be honest with you. I felt like I was just talking from beyond there. What was that?
I don't know. You're just skilled like that. You had like a double segue.
Is that AI me? What's going on?
Yeah, Scala AI.
We should get Chris Craven back in here. What was his name? Chris McDonough. When he was a guest on our show.
Father Craven.
Yeah, Father Craven. Because he is a bus driver, he told us. Works for the MTA. He'll be able to tell us how he's classified.
All right. If that's something that's of concern with them and their union.
But the story about Rikers, and again, this comes out of the court case, is it may be headed for receivership, which is the idea that a private entity, I guess kind of similar if you want to draw comparisons, but another entity outside of the government would potentially be tasked with overseeing operations of Rikers until at least it could get within constitutional bounds, right? The idea being that a court would declare Rikers to be unconstitutional in the way that it's operating. It's not meeting its constitutional standards. Instead of closing it entirely, a court could step in and appoint a receiver to oversee the operations until it could be brought up to par.
I don't understand why it's so difficult to get it up to par. The difficult part would be, in my estimation, would be the structural issues as far as facility wise, right? That takes time, that takes building, that takes manpower and effort. But behavioral wise of the employees and the processes, that stuff can be hashed out over a weekend and implemented in a short order. If you've got officers that are committing misconduct,
Mm-hmm.
you get rid of them. If you're trying to turn this around like that, if they're committing gross acts of misconduct,
I think that's just the tip of the iceberg, though.
Sure, that's the tip of the iceberg. But I mean, like, some of that stuff can be turned around much easier if people aren't pushing back against it, and that's what I think happens in these situations.
People are pushing back against turning it around.
Yeah, it's like, who are you to tell me how to run my prison? You're not here on the ground. You don't know what we have to deal with, this and that. And they feel that violating these rules or making it, in line with the Constitution is something that they have to overstep because their situation is much different than every other situation or what have you.
Yeah. I mean, I think a big part of it is the right to a speedy trial, right? Rikers is not a prison, it's a jail. It's meant to be, for the most part, a place where people are held until they have their trial, right? You do have some people who are convicted who have to serve time on Rikers. It's not supposed to be for lengthy sentences. But for the most part, it's supposed to be people who are waiting for their trial. But when they're so backlogged,
right,
then people are waiting for too long, and it does become a violation of their right to a speedy trial. You don't want to have people detained for years when they haven't even been convicted of something yet, because that does violate their right. So I think that's a major systemic issue. Now, you also have a big push to close Rikers, but why? I think you have to read into that. Why is there such a big push to close it entirely, and who wants it closed. I do think that there is a big real estate interest that wants to redevelop that land. And I think a lot of that rhetoric, a lot of that push comes from those interests, even if it's being done quietly.
And I think some of those voices are also because of the atrocities that happen at Rikers, the violations that happen at Rikers,
But why isn't, but like you said right away, your first instinct was, well, why don't you correct those issues? Why is the answer to move the facility? Because that's not correcting the issues. That's just,
no, it's not.
We're going to go from here to here and do the same thing.
I agree with that. But I would think some of the voices that are calling for that push also contain voices who are calling it on that grounds instead of just the real estate issue.
Right, but I think the real estate interest is what's driving it, and I think they're happy to have those other voices take their agenda and run with it, right? Because again, what is the solution here? You're saying close it, and then what?
Right.
I know there was a push for borough-based jails, right? We're going to put jails in every borough, but why are we so sure that that is the solution? That's going to address the problems, the constitutional violations that we've been seeing. Physically changing the location is magically going to cure all of that?
No, the backlog is still going to be there. The court still is going to have that type of issue as well.
Conduct, who's to say that all this misconduct is going to go away because now you're in another part of Queens as opposed to on an island?
Right. And I think in some situations, you could probably look at that if you're going to say, we're going to split that up and put it in the different boroughs. Well, now you've got to do oversight over, let's say, 5 locations instead of 1. So there's probably more chance for that misconduct to take place because more things could slip into the cracks because there's more moving parts. So, I think, if they want to do it, there are some things they could initiate to turn it around immediately. And then there's other things that are systemic that, is going to take much more time, much more effort to do. So it's not a one silver bullet solution type of thing.
Right. The receivership is an interesting idea. Courts will sometimes do it. It isn't the most common solution, right? Decision that a court makes, but it does happen. There is some precedent for it. And then there's a question of who would be the receiver, right? Apparently, the way this would work is both sides in this lawsuit would submit a list of potential receivers to the judge, and the judge could make a determination. They can say, I think this person should be the receiver of records. They could appoint someone to oversee it.
Now, would that be an organization? Would that be like a head person? Would that be a private prison industry group? Without
be up for the judge to decide. But from what I'm seeing, there are individual names who are being considered for this. People, people with experience in this.
In that article, it looked like it has happened before. Alabama was the nation's first place to lose control over its prison and jails in 1976. And I guess they got it back in 1989. So that's pretty significant length of time.
Steve Martin, yeah. He is a federal monitor who was appointed to oversee reforms. And his name is on the list, at least according to City and State. They're saying that given that he's been entrenched in these issues at city jails as a federal monitor, there's a possibility he could be appointed the receiver at Rikers.
Yeah, it's I think just the fact that it's being considered just shows how out of control the situation is.
Well, also it's interesting that we were told only a couple of years ago that it was a done deal that Rikers was going to close and that land would be developed by real estate. And that's not the conversation that we're having today, right? Now we're talking about potentially having a receiver appointed to try to correct the issues at Rikers.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that conversation to closing Rikers has been it's like the conversation to close Guantanamo. It's just like
Right.
it constantly happens, but nothing seems
And
to
that's right. But I always want to know when people say things like that, okay, but what is your solution?
right.
Right? I hear you on that. Okay. You're saying that it's beyond repair. People say that all the time, right? It's beyond fixing. It's beyond getting under control. It's always going to be a problem. But so what are you proposing now? Okay, so you close it and then what? What is the next step? Walk
Right.
me through it, right? Because there are some people who will just say, well, abolish all jails and all prisons, but replace it with what? What is your plan? Or do
Right.
you not think it through? Right? I want to
There
know.
there has to be something that takes place next, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to, because to me, that's a hashtag, right? It's
Right.
easy to do the hashtags. It's easy to do the tweets or the X's, whatever we're calling them now. But what is the
Yeah.
real plan? That's where you need nuance.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think you've got some experience there. You did a short bit in Rikers, so
So that could be a good way to close out the show for this week. My experience at Rikers. Actually, I was there as an attorney volunteering with my friend Kevin Livingston, who's got a group called 100 Suits for 100 Men. Actually, you met him
Yep.
quite a few times in the past.
Yep.
Great guy. He's been expanding that organization over the past 10 plus years. And he asked if I would come to speak with some of the people locked up on Rikers because he's been running a program there where he teaches them skills, right? Because the idea is many of these men are going to be released into society, and he wants to be able to ensure they can get back on their feet and be contributing members of society so that the cycle doesn't repeat and then they'll end up back in Rikers, right? So he'll teach them all kinds of skills. He had a whole program, and really in Rikers, they've got a school, right? It looks like a regular school, like a regular public school that you would find anywhere around the city. And they've got, classrooms and everything. And so he would take them in a couple times a week, bring all kinds of guests to do guest lectures, and they would do resume writing skills and all different things like that. So he had me come at the end of the program when these guys were graduating now, his program, to have lawyers. And he had me, who does civil litigation, another lawyer who does criminal defense. And he had us speak with the inmates in this particular class. They loved it because it was an escape from them. I mean, you could just imagine, would you rather be in jail or feel like you're actually in jail with the bars and the guards and everything, or would you rather sit in a classroom? And to them, they felt like they were in school and they were, learning how to become regular people and just like they would be back home. So everyone loved it, right? But what I found most interesting, most rewarding about the experience is I got to rap, right? And that was the biggest thing. That was the biggest thing there because we finished the program and they were getting ready to go back to their housing units, wherever they were to be. And they were rapping amongst themselves in the classroom, right? And I think I joked to Kevin that I should get in on this. And I didn't even really mean anything by it, but he all of a sudden just made a big announcement. He was like, "Hey, everyone, my man Mike wants to get in on this." And so I actually, because I was put on the spot, I did my verse from Inferno. And somebody yelled out, he was like, wait a minute, because they couldn't believe it. Because I think the first reaction was that I was just a lawyer and I heard them rapping and I wanted to try it. So they thought I was terrible at it, right? But they thought it would be funny or fun to watch me try to rap. But then when they saw it was actually good, one guy, because the reaction at first was, well, wait a minute, this is much better than we thought it was going to be. And then somebody yelled out from the back. He was like, wait a minute. He was like, this isn't your first time. Like, you've been know how to rap. And then I had to explain to them that, yeah, I actually am a hip hop artist. Even before I went to law school, this is what I was doing. But the reaction was great, right? Because they weren't expecting that at all. And then as I was leaving, I heard a few of them rapping my verse, like to each other. Like they just started like my verse because I could really stuck with it, resonated with them. Of the experience, that was the best part to me. That easily trumped anything about me talking about the law and the civil rights and the conditions on Rikers, and that was all cool. And I was glad to do it, but to connect with them on that level right? That was the most powerful moment for me. And because I saw, honestly, I saw people removed more by that than anything I can tell them about the law or anything else, right? That was what resonated. I think it reinforced in me that just being an artist, you really can move people in a way that you can't in other areas.
Right. You became more relatable.
Yeah.
And you made that human connection, which is
absolutely.
very important. Cold hard facts or law rules and things, it just doesn't make that connection. It's more knowledge to take in, but if you're sharing a cipher with people, like there's that human connection there.
Yeah. And you can just move people. I mean, you can inspire people to action even, I think, more with art oftentimes than you could with anything else.
Yeah.
With policy, right? I mean, you can give a great speech, you can write a great law, you can all these discussions we're having, but a good piece of art, whether that's a song or whether it's a painting, a movie, whatever it is, I think that gets to people more. I think that hits them in the heart more, and it can move people. It can actually inspire people to action, I think, more directly than anything else can.
Yeah, absolutely. Art is a very powerful medium.
Yeah. For me, thinking about just my own journey, right? Coming up through hip hop, finding myself on Rikers to speak about law, but then getting to use that hip hop and kind of bring it all together. It was a powerful moment for me, and it made me kind of grounded me in a sense. Maybe realize I shouldn't lose sight of this hip hop, of the art form, right, of the culture, because that is very powerful. So you try and do all these great positive things, but don't leave that behind, because that could be a very useful tool in the battle as well.
Absolutely. And we've seen people who have tried to make a shift to something else out of it and try to distance themselves from hip hop in particular. I don't remember the guy's name that's top of mind right now. They were making a political run and tried to just bury everything that had to do with their hip hop experience.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You know the guy. I don't remember his name right now, but
Antonio Delgado?
I don't remember that. I probably know their rap name.
Now you got me curious.
Yeah, we'll look it up afterwards. Yeah. But I think, like you said, that relatability and that human connection is so important. And I think that informs or can inform everything else that we talked about here today. Right? From the, how to deal with the really difficult situation of the migrants and, reaching capacity, to, dealing with retirees, like that human connection and that relatability and understanding is something that always needs to be in the conversation, always has to take place, and should be what informs our actions.
Yes. Was that the bottom line? Because I was trying to think of a good bottom line, but that could have been it right.
Sounded like a bottom line, didn't it?
Kind of did.
Okay, well, if that was the bottom line, then Mike, where can the people find us?
I was going to say, hold on. Since you gave the bottom line first, line bottom is what, Carter J?
There we go. A little bit of Nas inspired.
Yeah, but people can't find us everywhere. I mean, that's pretty much it, right? Everywhere podcasts are available. Subscribe. You can have the show automatically pushed to your device. Of course, we're on YouTube podcasts, YouTube videos, YouTube. It's Nuance with Mike Scala and Jay Carter. All of the archived shows are there, as well as clips. You'll see we've got polls up there. We've got shorts from the shows that you can check out. Of course, we're on Instagram at Nuance Show, and Facebook Live every week for those who like to catch the live stream. Every Tuesday night in New York, Wednesday morning in Japan, wherever you're at in the world.
Absolutely. And of course, thank you to those who come in and join us, raise questions in there. That's really important part of this, is to have that discussion. for people to give their input, but also to hear, other facets of whatever the issue or the topic is, and to take those things into consideration and acknowledge those as well. So.
Absolutely. And as always, we've got work to do. We'll catch you next time.